What were things that you discussed that would be positive about this, or things that you need to consider if you're using this model? Do we have anyone from 6th, 7th, or 8th grade breakout groups that's willing to share with us?
Tiffany, I'll do 7th. This is Donna. I wrote down the notes because we didn't get very far on the second one. So the benefit that they liked was it was a very slow progression that gave you plenty of time. But then they jumped on to considerations that the district would need to think about. So they had concerns with the option 1 that 8th grade would have to implement a large number of new standards in a test year. And there was a concern that coupled with the fact that there were 20 standards for grade 8 in option 1, and that there would have to be a lot of conversations between grade levels. And then we did have one district point out that they have 6th grade located in 25 different buildings. So they didn't know exactly, but they said there was an issue with supplies for them because there was going to be a lot of things that would have to be shared that wouldn't work. And then a concern about how this is going to work with textbook adoptions. So that was it.
Great. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a moment because we realized that record has paused. So I'm just going to go back and, oh, it looks like it's working now. So we're good to go. 7th grade group, those are a lot of reflections. I can see why you guys would have liked some more time for that second model to dig into that a little bit more deeply. So I wonder, from 8th grade or 6th grade, were there any other considerations that 7th grade didn't address, or realizations that 7th grade didn't address that you talked about in your groups? Anything else that came up with this particular model? Well, I'm happy to share one thing from the 6th grade group that I don't think came out from the 7th grade. And that was from one of our teachers who teaches both 7th and 8th grade. And she mentioned that she liked this model a little better because she felt that she could focus next year on implementing the new 7th grade science standards, and the following year, the 3rd year, on 8th grade, and not be sort of trying to focus on transitioning both 7th grade and 8th grade at the same time. So that might be another reason why this option would appeal to a district or a teacher for the implementation timeline.
Tiffany, can I say something?
Yeah.
I was in the 7th grade group with the big discussion, and I see a lot of different in implementation among large districts versus small districts. You know, when we were talking about sharing of resources, and we have 6th grade in our elementary schools. So we can't even, like, you know, share those resources. We have 25 elementary schools to look at. And so, you know, if you have 6th, 7th, and 8th, and you're a smaller district and you have teachers that are teaching 2 or 3 of these same, it's going to look a lot different than a larger district.
Right, right. And that really is the reason why we at the state level, we can showcase for you some options that school districts are looking at, but it really should be you at the local level working to figure out what makes the most sense for you. Now, one thing we will do, and we're going to ask for, is if you as a school district are thinking about a different model, we would hope you'd share that with us so we can share that more broadly with others in the state. That's one thing, you know, our Oklahoma science teachers have been really great about in the last several years, is just being a network and a community to support one another. And that is one way that you can help other teachers, is by showcasing different models that you may be using. And again, we'd be happy to share some of those through the state level. So let's take a look at option 2 and try to work through that and talk through maybe why a district would choose to use this model of having, really the only difference is that the 7th and 8th grade teachers start to implement the new standards in the second year, the first year for 7th grade and the second year for 8th grade. And I believe this model was appreciated by some teachers in a couple of districts, because particularly at 8th grade, it gave the 8th grade teachers a year to implement some of those new standards before the year that students would be assessed on those new standards. So in 21-22, they incorporate several new standards in 8th grade, but then the assessment isn't aligned until 2022-2023. So that's one of the reasons why I think a district might choose this particular model. Another reason is that if we look at the difference between option 1 and option 2, particularly for 7th grade, let's just go back up here. For 7th grade, if you chose option 1, you'd be implementing the new standards in the 21-22 school year, and you'd have 16 new standards to implement. Whereas in option 2, 7th grade teachers would implement 6 new standards in 2021 and an additional a few more standards in 21-22. So it's kind of a slower implementation of that newness.
Tiffany, I have a question.
Yeah.
When you go and you look at option 1, then there are 16 new standards for 7th grade, but then when you scroll to the option 2, it adds up to 18 new standards. Is that because that new standard in the darker red is counted twice?
I believe so. We probably need to get those numbers changed, and that's why this is a feedback loop, so we can get those corrections made. So we'll get those numbers changed for you so that when you go back in, there's not that error. So appreciate you pointing that out. Are there any districts or teachers that see this model as something that they're interested in, and if so, why?
Elise Heiss here. I have my 7th grade teacher with me, and we were just discussing that we're actually very interested in this second model because I think I mentioned in our breakout, our 6th grade teacher is retiring soon. And so with the fewer standards, even though there's 9 new standards, there's fewer, but this lets us play a little bit, use up the resources that we have and that we have to use and get it out of our budget and off of our budget before we actually are able to get our new materials and figure out what's going to work best for us before moving forward instead. And it lets us figure out where we actually stand over the next couple of years.
Great, and I do think that's a large reason why people might choose this particular model. So one of the things we want to share with you is we're going to continue these discussions. If you'll give us a chance to really go back through both of these models and create a published document for you before you share with your larger district, we anticipate having that available to share out on Tuesday. But before you really use this to publicize with others, we want to take it back internally, think about all the things you've shared with us, some of the corrections we need to make, and we'll turn this into a document that allows districts and teachers to see these two models, but then reflect on why the models might be good choices for them. So if you'll give us till Tuesday, we would appreciate it. Please don't share necessarily on the internet or anything yet, because these are really in rough draft working stages, and getting that feedback from you all is extremely important on this. Before we move on to resources, is there any last sort of comment anyone wishes to make about these two models, or an additional model that you might like to see us work on?
We just had a discussion about the textbook adoption and how the slower rollout might cause an issue with that. With which model? Both models or just one model? The second model.
The second model. Yes, you would certainly have to really think about holding on to the previous instructional materials, perhaps, while you're incorporating those new instructional materials in that 21-22 school year, because that's when you would get new instructional materials, is the 21-22 school year. Well, thank you all very much. I can't tell you enough behind the scenes, the work that has happened with the science team here at the State Department, as well as with a few curriculum coordinators who were helping us think through all the complexities with the shifts and how we might provide some models that would be useful, understanding that there are a lot of things to consider here. The biggest thing, or the biggest takeaway I hope that that you take from this is that whatever model you choose, Model 1 or Model 2, or even a different model that we're not showcasing, as you're thinking about those transitions, keep an eye on ensuring that students don't miss any standards as they're transitioning to new grade levels and you are transitioning to new standards. That's a key thing to keep in mind. All right, well, thank you all again so much. Heather's going to share with us a few implementation supports and instructional resources that we have available now, and then others that we'll be working on in the next couple of weeks to month to share out. So Heather?
All right, yes. So in thinking about the supports that are needed as we move forward with this, there are several different things that we're going to be offering this summer, including some professional development, and then implementation supports as well. So if we go to the first slide. So one thing that we do want to bring up as the application due date is next week is our middle school science summer academy. So this is for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and it is free. And so it will be a virtual training. There is an application, so please make sure to fill that out. It's focused on free and open instructional materials that are offered through Open SciEd. If you are not familiar with that, we do have a video linked of our very own Oklahoma teachers using these materials, so you can check that out and then submit an application so that you can join us in July. Engage OK this summer is going to be virtual. And so it does require a registration as it is limited seating, and since we are in a virtual format. The science session is going to be on Friday, July 17th, and we have included a link to the registry here, and so that you can join us in July for that one as well. Next slide.
Yeah, and Heather, if I could just mention, this would be a good session if you're still looking at how you can adapt your current instructional materials to align to the new standards.
We do hope to continue our virtual meetings throughout the summer. Our next one is planned for June 19th, which is next Friday from 3 to 4. In the survey that you're going to take at the end, we're making sure that that particular time is still okay with everybody. So there may be some changes in July with possibly the day or the time that's associated with this. Any of those kinds of announcements are going to be sent through the newsletter. So if you have not signed up for the OKSci newsletter, please be sure to do so. And that link is also in the presentation. For implementation support, so those kinds of resources, we do have the curriculum frameworks for science. They are not updated with the new standards. That is something that we are going to expand upon during this next school year, but they are still available as a resource, and you can go there and look for some guidance. We are going to be providing some bundling guidance later on this summer, as kind of like a bridge between what we currently have and what is coming in the future. So we'll be showing like some standard connections within the grade levels, as well as other free and open instructional resources that are available.
And this will be particularly focused on middle school, because we know middle school is dealing with the most shifts or transitions. So this supplemental framework will be centered on middle school, and we'll be working very quickly to get that out as soon as possible, because we know that that's important for you as you're planning.
Yes. All right. We are going to be updating the OKSci PD on your plan modules. So if you are new to 3D science or just looking for a refresher, there are some really fabulous lessons and videos on the science website that you can go to. There was also, I think it's module 7 that is really great on coming up with a plan for bundling with new instructional resources, looking at content and how ideas come together, that they're going to be on there. We also have other resources linked to the website, and those will be updated this year hopefully this summer. And then this next year, we're going to be looking at some virtual courses during the school year.
And those virtual courses will be centered on helping teachers better understand not only the 3 dimensions of science, but we'll also try to include some content focus for teachers that may be teaching some new materials, some new content for their grade level.
Yes, and then so with that middle school grade level specific resources, our focus will be 6th grade first this summer, as both options are asking or potentially providing teachers that are transitioning in the fall to the standards, and then we will be moving through them, moving through the other grade levels as it comes up. And then we did want to give you a couple of websites that you can visit now that do have free lessons that are aligned to our standards and phenomenon driven. The 3 that are here, we have Phenomenal GRC Lessons, which is a website for actually elementary through high school. And along with the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade standards that are there, we have lessons on there from Oklahoma teachers as well. So with some local phenomenon for those particular lessons. Open SciEd and NGSS storylines are also very student driven, student interest driven with their phenomenon, making sure that the students are driving the investigations. But they also have already written lessons aligned to standards. So if you are missing some lessons or instructional materials for new standards to your grade level, these would be 3 great places to start looking for some of that supplemental material.
And if that phrasing of phenomenon is new to you, just want to point out that what we really mean there is these instructional materials are strongly aligned to our standards because they engage students in investigations, the real world investigations. And as they engage in those investigations, they're using science and engineering practices to collect data, to analyze data, to explain natural events in the world. They're engaged in investigations that prompt them to think with those cross-cutting concepts that we saw. And those investigations also allow students to learn those disciplinary core ideas very deeply because they're trying to use them to explain what they're noticing and wondering in their investigations. So again, all 3 of these resources that Heather's pulled together for us all provide those lessons or resources or units free and open, aligned to our new middle school standards. So it can be a bridge gap for you, as Heather mentioned.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that you might notice a little bit when you go in there is that their standards are coded how our 2014 were with the MS in front of it. So it would say MS-PS whatever, while ours now have the numbers where it says 6. PS 2.2. So but they would be the same. It's just the numbers, the nomenclature is a little different.
Right. But as Heather mentioned, one of our goals for a resource in the near future to get out to you all is a resource that would have a particular lesson or 2 or a unit or 2 linked to those standards that are new to you for your grade level. So that's our next step in resource development. We will likely be pulling from some of these resources that you see on the screen, some of these websites, but we'll also pull from some others to find particular lessons or units that are free and open, aligned to those new standards for your grade levels. And then lastly, we just want to mention this, Return to Oklahoma, the framework that was published by the State Department of Education last week. That particular document has guidance for schools and teachers as you may be thinking about instruction for the 2020-21 school year as it relates to thinking about different instructional delivery scenarios that you may be under for various reasons. Those different instructional scenarios might be in person, they could be blended, or they could be distance learning altogether for students. Lots of information in that document. What I will say is that Superintendent Hoffmeister mentioned yesterday to a group of district leaders that we know that many schools are planning for the traditional model of in-person, but they're also being prepared for opportunities for blended learning and distance learning if they have to shift to that. how districts plan for the different scenarios or how they'll start the school year, that is totally up to the district. But this guidance provides you with some things to think about if you're planning for those different instructional models. If you look at this guidance, there is specific guidance for planning for science instruction starting on page 36. It's brief guidance for now, but if you recall, during the time when we all shifted to distance learning at the State Department of Education, we provided a broader framework with a little information for science. And then we worked to develop additional resources that were really specific, in-depth for science planning during that time period. We are doing that same level of work right now to provide more in-depth guidance for science and thinking about distance learning and blended learning and creating some resources we think would be helpful. Just like you all, who are thinking about not only transitioning to new standards and how you might plan for that, but also planning for instruction in a unique school year next year. We too at the State Department are thinking about both of those things and trying to develop resources to get out to you to be as helpful as possible. But please also be patient with us as we're thinking about those things and trying to develop resources for all of that level of support. We do have a wonderful team with Samantha, Donna, Susan, and Heather, and they are working behind the scenes harder than you can imagine, just as I know many of you are. But that is available to you now, so you could take a look if you wanted to. Just know there's additional guidance coming, including, we were asked earlier this week, will there be guidance about how to handle maybe safety and laboratory experiences in the coming year. And that is one of the first documents that we're working on. So that is really our time today. We have about 12 minutes. We wanted to provide an opportunity for you to ask any additional questions that we might be able to answer. And if we can't answer it today, we'll take it in and try to work on an answer for you or a support structure to help you so that we can share with a larger community. So let's take a moment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see the wonderful Brady Bunch tiles and everybody, their names and pictures and videos. And if you have a question, would you please add it to the chat box, or feel free to unmute, and we'll try to do that in a nice structured way for folks as well. What questions do you still have, or what other resources would you like for us to consider possibly trying to develop to support you? Either of those would be fine to talk about during our now 11 minutes. Michelle, I see your question in the chat. I just want to make sure we clarify. So maybe you could unmute and talk that through. When you say higher turnover, are you talking about teacher turnover or student turnover?
Yeah. So like, and I'm sure our district isn't the only one that deals with that, but it seems like we have a pretty good high turnover. Either the teacher changes grade levels or we lose a lot of teachers at this middle school level. Our building is 6th through 8th grade. So when you all were talking about the different options in my brain, I was just wondering, you know, with that in mind, what option would be best to implement? Thinking about if we have a brand new teacher that maybe has never taught science before.
So I see Elise say option 1. And maybe you could share why you're thinking option 1 in response to Michelle.
Sorry, I thought I was off of the chat rocks and pushing my space bar to unmute myself, and it was just spacing. Because option 2 is so detailed and so spaced out for a new teacher to come in, I think it would be a little overwhelming for a new teacher that might have never taught science or doesn't quite know what's going on to get their legs underneath them. If you have a straightforward list, if you have something, nope, this is what you need to concern yourself with, I think option 1 is way more straightforward for them to concern themselves.
Yeah, I think one thing to consider with that is if you have, let's say, a new teacher to 8th grade and they're moving forward with the new standards, sort of that rip the Band-Aid off, model, you would still want to think about if the 7th grade teacher isn't fully transitioning in that same sort of timeline, you just want to be considerate of that student experience. And is there any, gaps in learning or, replication of learning is not that, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you would just want to make sure that I think that as a district or a school with a group of teachers that you pick one model and go with it, so that for all grade levels, you're ensuring that students don't have gaps. So one thing to consider there. What other questions or comments do you have for us related to the information we've presented today? Other questions you might have that we didn't go over, or any resources you'd like for us to consider developing?
I have a question. We were originally looking at that rip the Band-Aid off method and are still in that thinking mode. But when I looked at the option 2, there were some things I liked about it. One question: that kids who are 8th graders next year in the 2021 school year, if we went with that option 2, would there be a few of the standards that they miss because between no, they would get all of them?
They would,
Okay.
because
I didn't have time. I didn't have time to analyze that, and I was like looking through it and trying to figure it out. So next year's 8th graders, if we went with the slower model, would only have 13 standards. No, they would already had ours. Okay, so
they would have already had the others. The only thing on that model, Susan and others, is that 8th grade year next year for option 2, the teachers would teach one new standard, and that is the ESS 3.5 standard, I believe.
Right,
and
okay.
you're only teaching it for that 1 year, and that's what fills the gap for those 8th grade students next year.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, great. Any other questions, comments related to our discussions today, or resources you'd like for us to consider pulling together?
I don't know if this was already discussed, but I went to a online PD yesterday with someone who is has kind of left teaching and now professionally goes around. It's the Bozeman Science Paul Anderson person. And he gave us such great tips for if we have to go virtual or remote, how to do science. It was like one of the really best, PDs for that that I've been to. It would be helpful if the state had some things. It was simple things like if you are right here engaged in the meeting, then your camera's on, your face is on screen. If you have to get up and leave, you shut your camera off, and that tells people that you've stepped away. And we are to consider you not present in the meeting at that time. But he just had some really good tips. And I think that is the state putting together any kind of a, hey, here are some really tried and tested methods.
Yeah, sort of those practical tips for distance learning. Yeah. So we are trying to pull some of that together, and we'll certainly take a look at the work of Bozeman Science. One thing I do want to mention is, again, that middle school summer academy workshop. Not only if you participate in that will you end up having a free, strong professional development around one unit that you can implement next year that's around your new standards, or implement it whenever you do transition to those new standards. Not only will that workshop focus on that free and open instructional material set and how to teach that, but additionally, the Open SciEd team, what they did in this last school year with the teachers that in Oklahoma they were working with, they then transitioned all of the materials and all of the support structures for teachers to help them then provide that instruction through a distance learning format. So not only will you get those instructional materials and training on those instructional materials, but they will also go over in depth those strategies for making investigations happen in a distance learning setting. And some of those practical tips, Susan, that you mentioned from Bozeman Science, they will cover both of those things in that Summer Academy workshop. And remember, The science team at OSDE will continue to host the biweekly meetings, and that's where we'll begin to slowly roll out some of those additional resources and share some of those practical tips. So certainly we hope you'll join those biweekly meetings that Heather will be announcing in the newsletter, the dates and times for all of that.
Monthly meetings.
Sorry, monthly.
That's okay.
Sorry.
I was like, whoa.
So Susan asked, does the Summer Academy choose the standard or unit, or do we? So in the application, there's one grade level where if you applied for, I believe it was 6th grade, we asked people applying to choose which unit they were most interested in so that we could determine which one to focus on. But for 7th and 8th grade, those units have been chosen, and they were specifically chosen to focus on new standards for those grade levels. Great questions. Anything else? Any other questions? And Susan, I'm sorry, Heather or Donna, would you mind putting the link to the survey back in the chat? So we would ask for everyone to complete that survey. That helps us improve and helps us understand what you would like to see come next. As a reminder, this webinar and the webinar earlier this week, we will be editing a bit and compiling all of the resources in final format to publish early next week on the science website and through the science newsletter.
If you are unable to attend the Open Science Ed workshop for the 7th and 8th grade, will you still have access to those units? Will they be on their website?
Yes,
Okay.
they're all there. I will say that those particular instructional materials were designed around a model of making sure that the teacher edition that goes with that unit is highly educative for the teacher. And I say that to you because if you go and you download those resources, let's say you download a unit for 8th grade, you'll then download the student materials and the teacher edition. That teacher edition is several pages, and if you printed it out, it's much thicker than the student materials, but it's because they went through the process of making sure to explain everything to teachers, from the content to the instructional strategies, to the process thinking about when you introduce something and how you introduce something. So it's all there in that teacher edition, which makes that edition a pretty robust document. So I just wanted to make you aware of that so you wouldn't be surprised. Those instructional materials on the student side, there are a couple of ways you can handle the student materials or the student handouts. You can print them out as a district, you can offer them online, or you can order them through, there's a sort of a third-party vendor that you could order them already printed out, looking all nice and put together, and they're really not that much for each unit. So you can print them off, you can load them on a device, or you can order those student handouts.
Tiffany, and a question, I'm getting several personal messages, and it's about Open Sci-Ed. They've applied and they'd like to know about acceptance.
So we extended the deadline just a bit. Basically, we extended it just to afford people who maybe weren't aware of it, who came to the webinar today, and this is the first time you're finding out about it. We extended the deadline to June 16th, which is next Tuesday, but June 19th is when we're going to let everyone know if they've been accepted. What I would encourage you to do is, if you've applied for the workshop, please keep it on your schedule. There's a high likelihood that we'll be able to adjust and allow most everyone to attend. So just hold that placeholder, and then on June 19th, Susan Ray will be emailing you all to confirm. But there is space, so don't be afraid about telling your friends because you want to hold space. So we still have a little over 100 slots available, and we'll just have to see what the applications come in. But we would recommend have a friend attend with you. It's so much easier and better to implement these new units if you've got sort of a teacher, even if it's at a different grade level, working through implementing one of those as well. Great questions, everyone. I just want to say on behalf of the whole team, we just appreciate you all so much for taking an hour and a half out of your day to join us, and appreciate your grace and understanding that many of the documents are still in that working format as we're trying to finalize them and improve them based on your feedback. But please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions at all for any of the team members. We're all here to help you during this time period and in the coming years. So please reach out. We're going to stay on the line for anyone who has additional questions, but for everyone else, you're welcome to leave the meeting and just look for those next opportunities for us to come together and learn and grow together.